Hey there, guess what? I'm back and I got my microphone and I got my lamp and we're all set. So welcome to another edition of The Doctor Is In. It's good to be back behind the microphone. I really like doing this and it's better than, I think it's better for me to explain instead of writing a cold report in words, to kind of read and explain what I'm seeing around in the human trafficking world. So there is more updates about Relentless coming soon. But in the meantime, I thought today I'd take a look at the newly published, the U.S. State Department TIP report. And so that is Trafficking in Persons report. It's published every year since the year 2000. It highlights certain themes, names some heroes, and the bulk of the content consists of lengthy profiles of every nation regarding their response to human trafficking within their borders as judged by, you guessed it, the United States of America. Fun fact, USA didn't start to include itself until 2010. So it's a review of what's going on in the world and it tracks trends. It's also used as a diplomatic tool when considering human rights as part of negotiating issues between nations and things like that. So there's regular sections on introductions, terminology, and methodology. And so there's what I'm going to spend the bulk of this talk is just talking about some of those special sections and where every year they're highlighting something different. And so this year, there was a huge focus on engaging survivors in the anti-trafficking movement. So this is really fantastic because survivors play an extremely important role in our efforts to prevent human trafficking, to help identify it and address the aftercare and recovery of survivors. So we do need more survivor input. It's absolutely essential, and there's more and more trends. There's organizations that are led by survivors, and organizations are including survivors and things like that. So that's really key. And there's a lot more to be said and also done and researched about the proper recruitment and care of the survivor as he or she is working in the very sector that produced so much pain. But that's not the time to go into that here. However, I want to address some of what the report says, but also I'm noticing some problematic terminology in the treatment of the subject in this document. And so I want to sort of help you guys be aware of some of the trends that I'm seeing here. And so you might have different ideas or see things differently from me. And so I would love to hear from you about that. So, here's one of the gaps that I saw is that there's not much reporting in this report. There's not much written about the selection and training and the recruitment and development of survivors and making sure that they're a good fit for the organization, that they're healthy mentally, that there is a risk of codependency. There is a risk of having your healing, getting caught up in the helping, and there's an abuse of survivors and what they do for, and there's a check mark issue with some organizations. Yeah, we have a survivor, but they're not really doing proper care. So they do talk about making sure that there's mental health support, and I guess they didn't go into a lot of detail, so I guess that's a gap. But I just want to make sure that, we are looking at the development, the mental health support to make sure that survivors are properly taken care of, because there's the challenges of working in a potentially triggering environment, in this sector. And so that they do mention that the environment should be safe for people to experience triggers, which is good because you can't really predict. But, and it's not about avoidance of triggers. I've spoken a lot about trauma and things like that, but, just making sure that, that we're not abusing survivors in trying to meet this quota of having survivors in your care. So, that being said, they're talking about having, a board so that you have the organization And then you have an independent board or council of advisors to the organization. You have the organization, then you have an independent board or council of advisors to this organization, which is good. The bigger the organization, I guess. And that the organization should have survivors, and the independent board or council of advisors should have it. But that they also said, which was kind of interesting to me, that this independent board have an additional third party of independent survivors. So you have this organization, you have the independent board of advisors, and then you have another third party of advisors, of lived experience experts, to oversee and check on the safety of the organization, or making sure that there's proper equity, diversity, equity and inclusion, things like that. So you see where we're going. There is a lot about bias and equity experience, and less so about evidence-based and researched interventions that provide measurable and meaningful outcomes. I mean, this is about survivors, but still, I would like to have more proposals for sound research about outcomes and how to better prepare, and the long-term mental health of survivors who are working in this sector, and so that we can look back, do prospective studies, and understand more about what is doing, are there predictors of mental health stability and things like that for survivors who are involved in this sector. I mean, it's definitely a risk. There was a very interesting couple of notes about survivors may not have regular bank accounts or other regular financial support. That may be true. And that survivors may have, quote, unlimited access and complicated relationship with traditional banking institutions. And therefore, organizations should find creative ways, or even creating a, quote, special system to compensate them. Okay, so I get that. But if they're survivors and they're out of a trafficking situation and they're being employed legally, or legally compensated by these organizations, why are we not helping and assisting with their financial stability? Why are we not helping them with their banking and their saving and their financial stability? And if we're looking for ways to compensate them outside of regular financial institutions, are we going to pay in Bitcoin? I just wonder also how this creativity might be received with the tax accounting and donors and financial accountability. I don't know. That just seemed a little dodgy to me. There is a couple of contradictions, and I'll get into why this is triggering, about this lived experience, and then they're saying, be aware of, quote from the report, be aware of and unbiased to the differences in laws and government practices when looking for how promising practices vary across the globe. And yet this same document criticizes how certain countries and cultures are handling the trafficking situation. I mean, that's the whole point of the report. I understand. I mean, that was kind of my comment earlier. The USA is not perfect, and yet we're criticizing. But, there's perhaps different. Who are we according to this? They have their own lived experience about dealing with trafficking, but that's not the point, as I will show you later. Another contradiction, where they're talking about getting more survivors and lived experience experts into organizations to advise organizations, which again, I'm not really against, but, I quote, when engaging with or providing services to people of different cultures, it is essential not to assume people of the same ethnic background have the same beliefs or cultural practices. True. This is where cultural humility and competence comes in. However, I'm wondering what happens when a lived experience expert from a particular target group might have differing beliefs and practices from the majority of said target group. Maybe, this is where we have cultural humility. humility. This is why when we do have survivor input, but that you might have a survivor from said target group and yet represents a minority of opinions. And so, yes, I mean, we do need to be aware of this, but that when the problem is when we're relying on the lived experience expert as being having all the knowledge of what's happening. And that's where this trend of lived experience and the postmodern woke critical social justice theory comes in. And this is where I'm seeing this trend infiltrating the anti-human trafficking sector. And this is where I'm going to go with the next part of this talk. And so, lived experience. And so I'm going to quote a lot from the website New Discourses, which is really excellent. They have a whole encyclopedia of terms that you may not understand, like what is queer theory, what is ableism, what is lived experience, for example. And so, in lived experience, people are experts in their own lived experience. And that can conflict when providing guidance for organizations who seek to provide care for so many people with a wide variety of experiences, like I mentioned before. But this is from the website. In the theory of critical social justice, lived experience is the overwhelmingly primary way in which knowledge can be obtained. This should not be mistaken to mean one's firsthand experience. Well, all of us, we all have firsthand experience, and that informs how we live and be in the world. So most of us already recognize that provides a rather weak claim upon knowledge. Okay, so I have an experience, but that doesn't mean that's like what's true for everyone. So let me go back again. So lived experience is a primary way in which knowledge can be obtained, but it should not be mistaken to mean one's firsthand experience, which most of us already recognize to provide a rather weak claim upon knowledge, though it is both implied and claimed that this is what lived experience refers to in critical social justice. So I go on. Lived experience, as critical social justice uses the term, refers more specifically to one's life experiences in allegedly systemic power dynamics of dominance and oppression that shape society structurally as understood with a critical consciousness and interpreted through capital T theory. I go on, quote, because lived experience refers to an interpretation through theory, it is only the lived experience of oppression, as theory will have it, that counts. Thus, people in dominant groups or occupying relatively dominant positionalities in an intersectional analysis generally cannot appeal to their own experiences and call them lived experience because they haven't lived the experience of oppression. So I cannot be a lived experience expert because I do not have experience in oppression. Although, yeah. So anyway, so this is where we're seeing, when we start to see less reliance on empirical research and data gathering and more weight put on the lived experience of so-called lived experience experts, then there's a problem. I mean, we should have both and. This is how we gain knowledge. We have experience of the world, we have knowledge. And this is how all of us learn. But it's the tipping of the balance and disregarding one to have only the lived experience of the oppressed. That's what counts. So I'm all for more input from survivors to help us inform what we are doing in the anti-trafficking sector. I've worked with a number of them that have been immensely helpful. I've also seen them abused in ways that shouldn't be by the organization, just to highlight and to tell their story and over and over and over again. And so that's another issue of ethical storytelling, which they address in the report, and I'm not going to go into here. But we need to be more engaged with survivors to inform our interventions and care. Their lived experiences really do matter and help immensely. So, but it is possible that we are also seeing an encroachment of postmodern critical theory into this space, which will only lead to more confusion and overall less wisdom. One clue that we're reading here is lived experience, as I said, other forms of learning. The lived experience is only form of learning. And so the result is that when good research is carried out, but produces results and conclusions that contradict the woke narrative, then that research must be changed or disregarded. And I have seen this happen already, unfortunately. So I just wanted to highlight that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But I'm going to go on to mention other highlights from the report, which is not bad. So the state, they have a section on state-sponsored slavery, kind of bold because they're talking about China, North Korea, but they're also dealing with child soldiers, supply chain accountability, and slavery, particularly in China's Belt and Road Initiative. They have a section on promising practices in data collection, management, and dissemination. Good points, because we really do need that. You know, we need that research. We can't forget that. There's some case studies which highlight some, puts some human story into all of this reporting and data. But I found that some of them describe scenarios that do not account for the fact that different nations employ different definitions of human trafficking and deploy different methods of addressing the crime. And so, it's not to say these nations are perfect in their methods, but that these stories are nuanced in a way. If you read the report and you find the ones that I'm talking about, I'd love to hear it. See if you're seeing the same thing as what I see, is that there's certain agenda that they're going to promote, that this country is bad and that these people are always good, and that these stories lack context and nuance about this particular situation, which is always a problem when you're talking about stories. So is this an example of telling a story that's right? Is this an example of how not to do ethical storytelling? I don't know. So just want you to put on your thinking caps here. And so another section on forced labor and the clean energy transition, finding a responsible way forward. Yes, because we know our solar panels are tainted, every single one of them, different parts are tainted by slave labor, by the Uyghur Muslims or other people in China. And so, but their solution is to improve sector governance, including protection for labor rights through adherence to the highest ESG standards. So ES in environment, social, governance standards, ESG, blah, 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 talking about all that. Except that, ESG is not the end all be all. So except Tesla has a pretty low ESG score. Well, not totally low, but anyway, it's lower than Microsoft, I think, last time I checked. But so, they're addressing that there's its problem. We want to have these clean energy, but yet all the clean energy is produced by slaves. So, dilemma, what are we going to do about that? So, and then there's another section entitled The Climate Crisis, Exacerbating Vulnerabilities and the Looming Increase of Exploitation. So, climate change linked events, I quote, have cost hundreds of thousands of lives and billions of dollars in damage. There's no reference for that. Millions of people around the globe were forcibly displaced due to generalized violence, human rights violations, armed conflicts, and increasing threats caused by climate change, and also all the problems by LGBTQ plus IAA2S something. That's also due to climate change. Now, climate change is real, but I'm going to just put a pin in that. I'm working on another podcast about this just to expose the intersection of the climate crisis and human trafficking, and how they're just creating more crisis and they're creating a lot of noise for a nothing burger. I'm not saying human trafficking isn't on the rise. I'm not saying that there isn't an issue with the climate. I'm just saying that that's not exactly how you're hearing. So look forward to that. So I couldn't help but read the report on Germany. I just had to read this profile since I was there on the ground during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I got promoted. Germany got promoted from tier 2 to tier 1. Not sure why. Well, they did. On paper, they had these things that they did, which, the things that they did isn't bad. It's just what I saw wasn't on the ground, the improvements didn't really make a difference on the ground. So what they did on paper at this high altitude level wasn't translating into real change or benefit for victims and survivors. But this is not unique to Germany. So the section on prevention, which I'm really key on, prevention counts as doing some awareness, but it's just really what they threw prevention is just a mishmash of the other P's, like prosecution and protection. And they dress it up as prevention. So if you identify more victims, then that's prevention. If you educate about demand, or if you're increasing shelter availability or just doing more general awareness, like, have a 5K race about human trafficking or something. This is my favorite. Telling German men to stop going abroad to shag women whilst on holiday in other countries. Okay, yeah. Stop it. Okay. Well, anyway. So that's it. Germany, they're on the way. It's not perfect. But man, they have a long way to go. And you can look at some of the other videos about what's going on in Germany to find that out. But I'll wrap this up here. Keep it a bit short. I hope that this was helpful for you to understand a little bit more about the tip report, about what they're trying to do, and also some of the nuance and trends that I'm seeing from my position here. I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you disagree, or if you agree or disagree, or if you just have questions or want me to do a deeper dive on anything else you heard here. So thank you. I'd love to engage with you. Let me know what you care about, what you want to hear about. And of course, I have to say like and subscribe and blah, blah, blah. Get out there and make some vitamin D too while you're at it. Great. Have a good day. Bye.